Okay, so think about this for a sec. Can you actually remember, like really remember, a time before you even knew what your friends were eating for breakfast every single morning? A time before all those notifications?
It's crazy,
Right.
right?
I mean, it's almost like historical now.
Right.
I feel like we have to think back so hard, like, what was that like? Totally different from this, like, always-on world that we're in.
Yeah, totally.
And that's what we're looking at today. We're diving into this really cool essay. It's called The Last Unplugged Generation, Dear Future Generations.
Yeah.
It was written by Poole, a technologist and futurist at Tech Frontiers.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of Poole. They have some really interesting thoughts on this stuff.
Totally. And what's so cool about this essay is it's like directly addressed to, future generations like you guys who will only ever know a world that's like totally digital, right?
Yeah.
And it's coming from someone who remembers life before everything was digital, as they put it. So what we're going to do in this deep dive is we're going to try to really get into Poole's head. We're going to look at their key observations, try to feel the emotions behind the words, basically explore what it means to live, in both of these worlds, which is kind of what Poole did.
That's so interesting. So it's like we're trying to decode this message from the past, but like a recent past.
Exactly. A past that's fading fast, but is, still really important.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Poole starts off by describing, painting this picture of a world that's, slowly disappearing. A time when unplugged moments, as they call them, weren't something you chose. They were just normal life. Like, imagine just silence in public spaces. People just, lost in their own thoughts, not staring at a screen.
That's wild to think about, like silence.
I know, right.
What's really interesting for you all to consider is how that silence, that lack of constant digital input, might have actually shaped how people thought.
Right. If you're not always being bombarded with information, there's, more space for your own thoughts to develop, to go in new directions. Yeah. And it's funny, we fill every little moment, every spare second with our phones. What are we missing out on by doing that?
Well, I think research actually shows that when we have those moments of quiet, our brain goes into this default mode network, which is super important for creativity, for coming up with new ideas and also for just, solving problems.
Really?
Yeah. And that's very different from the focused attention that we have to use when we're on our phones.
I never thought of it like that.
A big difference, right? And, those moments of quiet time, they weren't just good for creativity. They were also important for developing self-awareness, for processing your emotions.
Okay, that makes sense.
So without constant digital engagement, you probably had more opportunities to just think about yourself, really figure out what you were feeling and who you were. And, that's something we might be missing out on now.
Yeah, totally. And then Poole talks about this thing, which is so crazy to think about now being unreachable.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
I know, right? Leaving your house with no way for anyone to get a hold of you unless you found a payphone?
Wow.
Relying on your memory to, remember directions? I mean, could you imagine?
Oh.
And that reliance on memory, it's interesting. It meant you had to really pay attention to the world around you. You had to be more present and really observe things. You couldn't just zone out and follow the little blue dot on a map.
Absolutely. And think about the simple act of just asking someone for directions. I mean, how often do you do that now?
Never.
Exactly. And back then, that was a normal social interaction. You had to actually talk to a stranger, maybe even have a little conversation. And who knows, maybe you'd even learn something new from them.
I think I would be terrified.
It's definitely different from how we interact now, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
It's much more mediated now, We're not really directly connecting in the same way.
And Poole actually mentions this idea of getting lost and how back then getting lost could lead to these amazing, unexpected discoveries. You take a wrong turn and you end up finding this cool new cafe or something.
Right. It's serendipity,
Yeah. But now with GPS, it's we've engineered all those happy accidents out of our lives.
That's a good point. I mean, think about it. You always take the most efficient route now.
Every single time.
And sure, it's convenient, but are you missing out on something by always choosing the fastest way?
That's a really good question.
Maybe we should all get lost on purpose once in a while, just to see what happens.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance, right? Efficiency is great, but sometimes it's those unexpected experiences that really make life interesting.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so then Poole moves on to this idea of commitment and presence. They talk about making plans and actually showing up physically.
Wow, what a concept.
Right, knocking on someone's door instead of just, sending a quick text. It's true.
It just feels like there is this like weight to those interactions back then.
Yeah, and what's interesting for you all to think about is, like, how has digital communication changed our expectations around commitment? It's so easy now to just cancel plans with a text message.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It happens all the time.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, do we feel the same level of obligation now compared to, when you had to actually put in the effort to show up in person?
That's a good point.
It's a different kind of investment, right? When you physically go somewhere, it communicates something different.
Yeah, it's like you're saying, this is important to me.
Exactly. And that message might get lost sometimes in all the digital back and forth.
Totally agree.
So yeah, it's definitely something to think about. How has technology changed the way we commit to things and to each other?
Totally. Okay, so then Poole gets into this really interesting idea of independent thought. Like trusting your own mind to form opinions without, constantly being influenced by what everyone else is saying online.
I know, that's a big one. It's huge, right? And they talk about the absence of what they call the collective internet's gaze.
Ooh, I like that.
I know, right? So, obviously the internet has so many benefits, but it also creates this environment where everyone is like constantly watching and judging.
And comparing themselves to everyone else.
Exactly. And back then, without that pressure, maybe it was easier to just, think for yourself.
One thing that you guys should really consider is that while the internet gives you access to a ton of different viewpoints, it can also create these like echo chambers where certain ideas get amplified really quickly, and it can be hard to know what to believe.
That's so true.
So even though there were limitations to how much information people could access in the past, there might have been more space to form your own opinions without feeling like you had to agree with what everyone else was saying online.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's almost like the difference between having a quiet conversation with yourself and being in this like giant room where everyone's shouting their opinions at you.
Exactly.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and both have their pros and cons, right? But they lead to very different ways of thinking.
Okay, so it's important to remember that Poole isn't saying that their generation was like better than yours. They're very clear about that. They just want you to understand that things were different and that there were both limitations and freedoms.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not about romanticizing the past. It's about understanding it. Seeing the good and the bad.
Exactly. It's about appreciating the unique qualities of each era and the trade-offs that come with them.
Right, and that makes Poole's perspective a lot more credible. Because they're not just being nostalgic, they're acknowledging that things have changed in really big ways and that those changes have had both positive and negative impact.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about what Poole wants you guys, the future generations, to take away from all of this.
Okay.
Their first message is about remembering that you exist beyond your digital self.
Yeah.
Like you're more than just your online persona.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important message, especially in a world where it can feel like your online presence is everything. It's so easy to get caught up in likes and followers and forget that you have value outside of all of that.
So true. Okay, and then Poole talks about not letting convenience, the convenience of technology overshadow depth. Like taking the time to think deeply about things and experiencing moments without feeling like you have to document and share everything online.
Yeah, and that speaks directly to you guys, right? It's about making a conscious choice to slow down, to have those moments of quiet reflection, to really experience things for yourself and not just for your followers.
Right, like enjoy the moment.
Exactly. And when you do that, when you cultivate that inner life that's not always being validated by technology, you can develop a much richer and more personal understanding of the world and who you are within it.
And their final message is all about protecting your ability to think freely, to question the information you're given, and to really try to understand things on a deeper level.
Yeah, and that is so crucial, especially now when you're constantly being bombarded with information from all sides. Information that's often presented without any context or nuance. You have to be able to think for yourself.
It's so easy to just believe everything you see online.
Right, and that's exactly what Poole is warning against. It's about maintaining your intellectual independence, like being able to form your own judgments based on critical thinking and not just blindly accepting what you're told.
I never thought about it like that.
So yeah, it's about being discerning, about questioning everything.
That's a good skill to have.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in closing, it's really clear that writing this letter was a deeply personal experience for Poole. They talk about feeling a sense of loss for the simplicity and solitude of the past, but also a sense of excitement for the potential of the future.
Yeah, and it's that tension, that back and forth between what was and what will be, that makes this essay so powerful and so relevant to you all. Because it's not just someone complaining about how things used to be better. It's about acknowledging that we're going through a massive transformation and that it's okay to feel complicated emotions about it.
Yeah. And as 7AI pointed out, Poole's letter captures a fundamental truth about the world that you guys are growing up in. It's a really important reflection on how much things have changed and what those changes mean for us as humans.
And I think what's especially insightful is that Poole doesn't shy away from the complexity of it all. They're honest about the things they miss from the pre-digital world, but they're also optimistic about the future. And that's a really valuable perspective to have.
Yeah, it's not black and white.
Exactly. And it shows that you can appreciate both the advancements we've made and the things we might have lost along the way.
So having this perspective from someone who's lived in both worlds is so valuable for you all because it gives you a glimpse into a way of life that you might not fully understand.
And it's not about saying that one way of life is better than the other. It's about understanding the full spectrum of human experience, seeing how things have changed and how those changes have shaped who we are.
So what can we take away from all of this? I think it's about finding that balance, right? Between appreciating the incredible things that technology allows us to do and remembering to value those aspects of the pre-digital world that fostered, like deep thinking, independent thought, and a different kind of presence.
Absolutely. And it's about making conscious choices, like choosing to disconnect sometimes, to be present in the moment, to cultivate those quiet spaces where you can think for yourself, because those things are still important, even in a hyper-connected world.
It makes you wonder, I mean, in a world where you're always plugged in, what does it even mean to be unplugged? Like, what does that look like for you?
And what would you discover if you actually tried it?
That's a good question. It's something to think about. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What do you think about J. Poole's letter? What resonates with you? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.